the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, episode 15.
Welcome to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R Squared Global.
Welcome to another edition of the Global Energy Leaders Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Ray. It is so good to have you today. And today we have on Gregory Zuckerman talking about his book, The Frackers. If you want a chance to win this amazing book, all you have to do is leave a written review in iTunes. It is the book we're giving away this month, and it is fantastic. We do not cover 1% of the material in here. It is also available on Audible if you like to listen to books, so you can check it out there. Guys, I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm going to get out the way. Let's get to the interview with Gregory Zuckerman. Greg, it's good to finally get to sit down and talk to you. How are you doing today?
Doing well, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. And I'm kind of like a little kid here talking about this book today because I found your book and I was just enthralled with this story that you told, because for me and for a lot of the audience, they were a part of this story, but not necessarily at the level that you wrote it at, but we were in the story kind of unknown to ourselves of what's going on, and there's all these moving parts. And the book we're talking about today is The Frackers with author Gregory Zuckerman. So tell us why you wrote the book and what was kind of the inspiration to get you going on this project.
Sure, and great to be here. So I'm a lover of business stories, and when I looked at what had transpired in this country, where we went from a nation that was really scared about our future. We were worried about importing both crude and natural gas, and from people that we didn't really like so much, and that wasn't going to change anytime soon. And again, we were nervous as a nation, and how that's changed to the point where we're exporting both crude and natural gas. It just seemed like the most important business story out there. But to my mind, it hadn't been told. The story hadn't been told how it happened and who the people were behind it. And that's what I tried to do, try to set out to figure out who's responsible, who are the pioneers. So I tried to tell that story.
Well, and you did a great job, and you did a good job of kind of predating what we would understand as the shale revolution and then working us into that story. And you tell it from a bunch of different levels. You get the CEOs like Aubrey Mcclendon, and you get people who just work in the industry. Was it hard to kind of track down all the players? What was the research amount time that you had to do to just put all these narratives together?
Before I address that, let me address your earlier point. That is sort of what I tried to do, combine both, not just write about the stars, the CEOs, but in some ways the book was a tribute to the average guy in the business. I don't mean average in a disparaging way, but, I was so impressed as I traveled the country, meeting the engineer and geologists at these companies and the hardworking, innovative folk who you just kind of happen to work in the business. I'm not from the business. I'm just a business writer. And when I met these people, I was really just so impressed, because we as a nation get criticized left and right for not innovating anymore. And it's just such a kind of bi-coastal perspective. I work in New York and spend time in California, and yeah, those people maybe are kind of down about our future, but you got to get out to places like Oklahoma and Louisiana and parts of Texas, where you see this revolution is the result of American creativity and innovation. And anyway, part of the book is really kind of written as a tribute to those kinds of people, the innovators. And that's the thing. I cover business, and often in the world of business, like Wall Street, you come up with some creative trade or strategy, you get paid, you get a lot of money. Whereas that's the thing that struck me when the people who were working for George Mitchell back in the day, who created this shale revolution, they proved how to get remarkable amounts of natural gas from shale. They didn't get paid so much. So in some ways, I'm hoping that the book gives them the credit they deserve.
Right, and I find that fascinating as well, because one of the things you see, and I'm not familiar with Mitchell's company like I was some of the others, is that each company kind of has its own structure on how they pay their CEOs and their support staff and all this stuff, and so you have a wide range of pay structures. I was a little caught off guard by that, but the other thing that caught me off guard was, it wasn't just Mitchell. It seemed like there was a few other people who were trying to develop this technology, but it was really kind of, I don't know, would you call it a lucky mishap that kind of pushed forward the technology? How would you describe what happens there when you talk about the fracking fluid?
Yeah, you need in life, and the older I get, the more I realize it. You need hard work and ingenuity, creativity, but you also need some good luck, good fortune. So that is exactly what happened. The group working for George Mitchell back in the day, this is sort of the late 90s, they were having frustrations and weren't making much progress. And then lo and behold, their contractor used way too much water one day in the mix. Back then, they weren't using as much water in the fracking mix. It was more of this foam, expensive foam, and all the contractors wanted to keep selling this expensive foam. And Nick Steinsberger, who was in charge of the Mitchell operation at the time, saw that they got more gas from the well than they'd expected the one day when they used mostly water, and they took it from there. And they get credit; they innovated on top of that. But yeah, you need some good luck on top of some smarts too in life.
Okay, so I want to transition a little bit here to the CEO level now, and let's talk about Aubrey Mcclendon. He is maybe one of the most controversial CEOs in the energy industry in the last decade. Obviously, he passed away recently, and so his notoriety is kind of fallen off the map with that. But during that time period, he was literally everywhere you could imagine. What was it like going through the process of researching Aubrey? And he's really, if you study him, at least from my experience, there's a lot of varying opinions on what people thought of him during his rise to fame.
Yeah, and that gets back to the earlier question, which I failed to answer. So some of the CEOs were more eager to talk than others. Some were really generous with their time. People like Sharif Suki and Tom Ward and Mr. Mitchell before he passed away. I sat down with him and spent a lot of time. And again, guys like Tom Ward brought me out to their hometown. We spent a lot of time together. But others were a little more wary, including Aubrey, and for good reason. Aubrey had been burned by the press often. I don't mean that that the press was they were critical, but they had reason to be critical of Aubrey. So he was wary of the press. So he was among those who, at least early on, really did not want to help with the book. He came around later, so I was lucky enough to communicate with him and met him once, and then we went back and forth a little bit. And yeah, he's among the most controversial figures in the oil and gas industry's history, and corporate America over the last few decades. He is responsible for a lot of this resurgence in natural gas, especially in this country in production. But he also let his shareholders down, let his debt holders down time and time again, made aggressive moves that really did not pay off. And what I kept coming back to, and it's not just with Aubrey, it's with a lot of the pioneers of the industry and the shale revolution, is that they themselves personally didn't realize the kind of gains that they could have or that they had at one point. I mean, Aubrey was worth about $3 billion at one point, but he kind of blew it. And other people did too. So we as citizens benefit. Natural gas prices are that much lower than they would otherwise be. And relative to the rest of the world, they're cheaper. And we were able to do things like with crude, do the boycott the Iranian oil, and prices have come down there too. So we've all benefited. But those who were the pioneers, the architects of the revolution, sometimes didn't benefit as much as you would have expected.
One of the things I found interesting was, so I've worked in the Haynesville and the Eagle Ford and the Bakken and the Permian, worked in all these different plays. And I remember when the Haynesville was going, the Eagle Ford really wasn't talked about. And you talk about kind of what's going on there with EOG and how they were kind of the forerunners into seeing this transition from shale gas into kind of more of a liquids-based play. And they moved to the Eagle Ford. And one of the questions I've always had is, we have these good statistics that reports on where storage is and where is it going and where the trends for. How was EOG able to kind of get a jump on the competition and figure out, hey, we need to start making a shift here, and other companies were a little bit slower to make that same move?
Well, that's mostly Mark Papa who gets credit. So they had a retreat at a hotel. I think it was in 2007 or 2008. I forget. It's in my book, but I have to open it up and check it out. But basically, they were all congratulating and high-fiving each other, and they're producing all this natural gas, and things looked good. And Papa said, well, hold on a second here. If we're getting so much more gas and it's becoming easier for us to produce so much more in shale, don't you think our competitors also going to find it much easier? And if that's the case, then it's going to crush prices at some point. We're in trouble, guys. So we shouldn't be celebrating. We've got to figure out what to do. And they turned on a dime and started leasing up in the Eagle Ford and elsewhere oil, targeting crude with the idea that crude is more unlikely to collapse in price. Now, it eventually did, obviously, but not for a while. And yeah, to their credit, they moved quickly, and you kind of need to be a smaller company to do that, a little bit under the radar screen. So they started leasing left and right. So they get a lot of credit for that.
Our guest today is Gregory Zuckerman, talking about his book, The Frackers. And Gregory, one more question about a CEO, and then I want to kind of transition just a few more. We'll let you get out of here. Harold Hamm, he's been in the news a lot, and one of the things that you put forward in the book that I found, quite appropriate right now with the new Trump administration is he was kind of the leader to stop the Keystone Pipeline, or at least was part of that group to stop it. And so I've heard a lot of discussion saying, hey, these oil guys, they're not politicians or businessmen. They're getting in here and they're going to really kind of change the way that policy is done because they're businessmen. And I always kind of thought, well, these high-level CEOs, they're just as much political in some sense as they are business because of what they have to do. And it seems that Hamm was kind of involved with the politics maybe a little bit more than people thought beforehand.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy, a very interesting guy. Harold came from nothing, dirt poor, created a company and found so much in the Bakken. At one point was worth about $16-17 billion, come down a little bit, but he's still among the wealthiest guys in the business. He was not happy with the book, was pretty disparaging of me afterwards, and downright rude. But I don't blame him. It's okay. He's a little sensitive because basically the book tells a lot of personal stories. They're all accurate, but he came to me. I give him credit. He really came from nothing, wasn't educated, and built an empire. And he found that kind of insulting that I talked about how little he had before and how he didn't have the education. But on the contrary, I found that more impressive. But okay, that's okay. But as you suggest, you have to be involved in politics when you're a CEO. And early on, he did fight Keystone because he thought it would bring in Canadian crude that would compete with Continental's crude from the Bakken. He did change, though, and he came around when they rerouted it and tweaked it a little bit. So yeah, he became more of a backer, but and obviously now he's also a backer. He's been a big backer of Donald Trump, partly because he just loathed Obama. I always find it really ironic that the oil and gas people, not all of them, but a lot of the guys in the oil and gas business just despised Obama and the Democrats, even though this resurgence happened during their administration. Obviously, they don't get credit. The Obama administration didn't do anything to deserve any credit for the renaissance in our American fields, but they also didn't stop it. That's for sure. So I guess Harold would say, well, yeah, we could have produced that much more in public lands and elsewhere, but I don't know. It's not like we haven't had this historic, remarkable renaissance in America despite Obama. Anyway, Harold, yes, not a fan of Democrats or Obama, and got behind Donald Trump and has his ear to this day.
Okay, so I want to kind of talk about one other thing in the book, and that was you weave together a lot of success stories and you weave together a lot of failures as well, and it's one beautiful narrative that you tell. What was it like interviewing these people who they went through this experience, and you got guys who are making millions or billions of dollars, and then there's some other folks who they lost it all, everything. They went all in, and it just didn't pan out by a matter of months maybe for some, or some just didn't have quite the money, or just different factors, but it didn't work out. What was that like going through that part of the book process?
Well, I think we can all relate to that. The one that got away kind of feeling many of us have experienced, where you're this close to greatness or good fortune, or wealth, and you couldn't quite pull it off. You made a mistake, or just weren't in the right place at the right time. So I think we can all relate to that. So I do try to show. I try to show that greatness sometimes is a matter of good fortune as much as it is hard work. And those that pulled it off, they deserve everything they get in terms of the wealth and the acclaim. And they, again, changed our country in so many ways. And there are few people in our history that are going to have the impact when you look back on it. It's people like George Mitchell, who's the architect of the shale revolution, and Aubrey, and some other people I write about. But yeah, for every one of those, there's somebody who's close, and I write about them too, because they were just as smart and savvy and prescient, but for whatever reason couldn't pull it off. So I like to tell their stories too.
Well, you did a fantastic job, and I've told everyone that I can think of that I've worked with during those periods to say, "Hey, you need to go check this out," because it's like again, like I said earlier, it's like it's part of my story that I mean, obviously I'm there and I'm doing stuff, but you didn't call me for for the book, and rightfully so. But you still feel connected because and I'm not going to give away any more of the book that we already have, and thank you for being generous. But there's just things that you say, and I'm like, oh, I remember when that happened, and I remember how I felt, and I remember the discussions we had, and oh, wow. Okay. I was working for this company and they did that and we never understood why. Now it makes sense. And so you just paint a beautiful narrative. And so anybody who's been in oil and gas, especially during that time period, I think you're really going to enjoy this book. And so leads me to my final thing. We were in California just a few weeks ago in Sacramento, and my son walks up to me and he walks up to this book, and I see these basketball players on it, and I immediately know it's your book. And it's your latest book. And so tell us about it, because it's a good story that you're telling in this book, and our audience who, they want to hear a good inspirational story for their kids might enjoy this as well.
Sure. So I wrote a book with my two sons. They came out recently. It's called Rising Above. And what we tried to do is talk to stars, basketball, baseball, soccer, a whole bunch of different sports, tennis, and talk about and ask them how they overcame different setbacks in life. And I'm a big fan of characters. So I wrote the Frackers because there are remarkable people in the oil and gas business that I thought pulled off something really amazing, and I wanted to tell their story. But I'm a fan of other kinds of characters too, including some of these stars who it's really amazing what they've overcome. So we write about everything from physical differences, physical abuse, racism, poverty, all kinds of things that I'm not sure I frankly could have overcome, and yet these people did. So I thought for young people, it would be both inspirational and entertaining, but also maybe tell some stories that can give us some help as parents in terms of teaching our kids. How do we teach our kids resilience? And that's what life's about. Again, the older I get, the more I realize that we're all going to have setbacks, and it's not just the smartest guy that wins or the hardest working person. It's somebody with resilience and an ability to deal with setbacks. So that's what our book is about, Rising Above, and we're hoping young people enjoy it. We've heard a lot of nice things about it. So, and I've spoken at some schools. We just came back. I was abroad speaking with one of my sons. We were talking to a school. So it's been a lot of fun just talking to kids and giving them some encouragement, and the stories hopefully will do so as well.
Okay, great. And we're going to link to your book, The Frackers and Rising Above, in the show notes. And we're going to link to the Wall Street Journal, where people can find you there as well. Thank you so much for coming on. Again, the book for me, it was just amazing. And so I can't speak highly enough of it. And we hope that everyone who's been in the oil and gas business, picks up a copy and reads this thing. It was so good. Thank you for your time. You've been very gracious, and we appreciate it. And we look to have you on again in the future.
Sure. Sure. It was a lot of fun. And I love the topic. I still love talking about it. And I love the people in the business. Sometimes maybe it takes an outsider like myself to really appreciate what the industry has done. So again, hopefully that comes across in the book. My appreciation for the remarkable, almost miraculous turnaround in this nation and what's been produced in the oil and gas business. So I'll be keeping an eye on things going forward. I'd love to stay in touch with people. People want to reach out to me. They can find me at the Wall Street Journal.
Greg, thanks so much for coming on again. It was a pleasure to speak with you. And guys, let me just tell you, I've given this book away to 2 or 3 or 4 maybe different people, and they've all said, this is just fantastic. And I had someone the other day reach out to me, actually a listener on the show, and said, hey, I'm looking to get in the oil and gas business. And I said, you need to read this. This is the book that kind of helps you understand what's been going on in the oil and gas business for the past 10 to 15 years and how this shale revolution kind of took hold and where it went and what was going on. And so those listeners who have reached out to me and said, I'm looking to get in the industry and I don't really know where to start, this book will put you on a playing field that a lot of people don't understand, because some of the information he gives in here, I'm going to give you one example. Aubrey Mcclendon, when we were working with Chesapeake many years ago, got a huge bonus, like $75 million bonus. And I remember there's a lot of questions in the newspaper and internally about why he got that bonus. And so I read the book and I went back to people who worked for Chesapeake at the time. And I said, hey, do you know why he got that bonus? And they said, no, we have no idea. We never really understood it. I said, you got to read the book. It's in there. He talks about it. And so there's a lot of things that goes through and explains what was going on during that time period when the shale revolution took off and what happened moving forward, and how EOG transitioned from the Haynesville to the Eagle Ford, and like we talked about, and all kinds of stuff. It is a fantastic book, and we'd love to give you a copy. All you've got to do is leave a written review in iTunes, and you can be entered to win. And if you already left a written review, you're entered to win this book already, so don't have to go back and do anything else. You're already in the drawing, guys. This book is worth the price of admission, as they would say. It's just filled with stuff, and so I can't recommend it enough. I just get excited thinking about the book, and it's kind of the way I've tried to describe this thing is, and I talked about it in the interview, is I was a part of this, and I'm still a part of this, like a lot of you are, and so this is my story, this is your story, this is our story, and so you need to get this to understand what was going on, because there's plenty of things that you may have known, and there's probably a lot of stuff that you didn't know. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, keep climbing.
Thanks for listening to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R Squared Global.